This episode of Bullet Heaven was made with a copy of the game provided by Seven Studio.
Three, two, one.
In episode 73 of Bullet Heaven, we took a look at Rising's gigantic mouthful of a title, Shippu Mahou Daisakusen Kingdom Grandprix for the Sega Saturn. We loved the amalgamation of shooting and racing elements that made Kingdom Grandprix a pretty unique entry in vertical shooting. But what about a racing game that adopts shooting elements? Well, in the name of Shmuppy Holidays, we're gonna find out. Developed solely by Aurélien Regard and released to Steam in 2015, the Next Penelope would finally make its way to the Nintendo Switch on December 21st by Seven Studios. The Next Penelope is predominantly a 2D overhead perspective racing game at its core, complete with multiple laps and various opponents. However, it also has some decent shooting chops to go with the racing action it sports. How does it hang in with the shooting crowd? Are we reaching a bit too far on Bullet Heaven? Well, we definitely don't think so, so let's take a closer look. The gameplay is pretty simple in the Next Penelope on the outset. Acceleration is automatic. Players gain velocity until they hit their top speed and have no way of actually slowing down manually. Using either the right and left inputs or the ZL and RL triggers on the Joy-Cons or a Switch-compatible controller, players can steer Penelope's ship as it barrels down the course. They're pretty finicky at first and it takes quite a while, but eventually it becomes more natural, which is good, especially when piloting Penelope's ship with perfect precision is required in completing later stages. At first, all players need to do is make it to the end of the course, but if a player falls off the side, damages their craft too heavily, or hits a dangerous obstacle, it's race over and the player must start again. Players can get a boosted start in certain trials when a spinning square closes in on Penelope's ship. Pressing B on Go at just the right time activates the boosted start. Players can also gain a bit of speed and make up time by hitting speed boost tiles placed around the course. After the first set of stages, additional trials are accessed by way of an overworld map. These challenges are ranked by difficulty, starting with medium level stages, then very hard, and finally impossible. Well, not really impossible, but it is pretty tough. There are also a number of extra stages that are locked on the outset and a hangar to spend experience points, which we'll get into shortly. As trials are overcome, new abilities are unlocked and assigned to a button on the Switch's controller. By the end of the first set of races, players will have a destructive booster mapped to B and laser mapped to Y at their disposal. This gives the Next Penelope an early, basic shooting mechanic. Other abilities like an anchor shot, mines, and a teleport ability are also unlocked as greater challenges are overcome and the boss for that area is defeated. In more advanced stages, some or all of these unlocked abilities will become not only instrumental, but critical to the player's progression. These weapons and techniques come at a cost. All of the abilities that Penelope obtains will drain her ship's power. If her ship runs out of power, the race is over and must be started again. There are two main methods to recovering power in the Next Penelope. Some tracks have green orbs that recover energy as they are passed over. Knowing where these patches are will help greatly in maximizing the player's energy, especially in advanced tracks. Players will also eventually get access to vampire mines, which reward the player with energy when they are tripped by an unassuming target. Knowing how to effectively place mines to gather energy from unfortunate opponents makes for a much more flexible time in navigating harder tracks and nabbing the top spot. It's not all just racing though. Using the same controls, some bosses are taken on in arena-style areas, in auto-scrolling vertical sections, and, in a particularly fitting manner to our series in particular, via pure side-scrolling shmup stages. What this ends up doing, though, is keeping the game from getting stale. Sure, some race types recur, like taking on 4 race opponents while trying to either overtake or eliminate them, but every boss is completely different from the last. As each area and its stages are conquered, players will obtain varying amounts of experience as well. Experience points can be used to purchase various perks that can help in making more efficient progress in the game. Extra speed, better handling, a better viewpoint, extra attack powers, and more can be unlocked in this way. If players need to change them around, all of the player's experience can be reset and redistributed at any time to suit certain situations, much like we saw in Aces of the Luftwaffe Squadron. Players can also grind cleared areas for extra experience and even gain experience chips thrown from fallen foes and other methods. The Next Penelope isn't terribly long, but that's not a bad thing either. Players can have a good time trying to overcome the game's core challenges without the game overstaying its welcome. The Next Penelope features a number of additional difficult bonus stages, complete with a score-chasing arena-style stage, that open up after the core game is completed, adding more replay value to the game on the whole. But there's also a multiplayer mode as well for up to 4 players. In this mode, the goal is to stay on the screen as long as possible. As opponents are destroyed, fall off the track, or disappear from the game's field of view, they are removed from the race. Last to survive wins the round and gets a point. First to 5 wins. CPU players can be played against, but the more human players are present, the more fun it is. On the whole, the Next Penelope is a good game for all that it offers, but there are a few issues. The controls feel a bit squirrely most of the time and can take quite a while to actually get the hang of. By extension, we never really felt confident in the jumps throughout the game either. It always looked as if Penelope would never make it to the other side, only to do so despite the player sprite always appearing to go beneath the track. More seriously though, sometimes the game glitches out in odd ways. Being firmly in first with a massive lead, only to get stuck in a perpetual last lap race and dropping to 5th of 5 until quitting was, interesting. Multiplayer isn't safe either. For a few laps of one set, Dairuna's ship failed to load into the next round, only to reappear after points were scored amongst other players. What? But resolving all of these issues is really just a patch away, so hopefully they are addressed in the near future. In the end, the Next Penelope is fun to play despite its flaws. Seeing it through to the end was definitely a worthwhile experience.
Energized. Energy restored.
Outside of experience points, players have very little in the way of scoring in the Next Penelope. But one bonus stage in particular, the Jail, has a direct scoring and multiplier system that high score chasers can mess around with a bit. In the Jail, players drift crash into enemies for points as long as they have energy to do so. To recover energy in this mode, players have to spin into a glowing energy bolt, which also yields points. If a player runs out of energy or gets hit directly by the bolt though, it's game over. As enemies are taken out in rapid succession, a multiplier will build up to a maximum of 10 times. Spinning into the bolt will result in larger point bonuses than enemies themselves, and this score is also affected by the multiplier. At times, bonus items will also appear that players can collect for larger sums of points, typically 2,000. The goal of the Jail is to hit a high score amount in order to open the door to the next area. A player's final score can be viewed on the overworld map in the post-game. But there are no online leaderboards in the Next Penelope, so the extra challenges that unlock will have only limited lasting appeal, but at least it's something.
Max energy.
The Next Penelope features a story that is largely a neo-futuristic take on Homer's Odyssey with a bit of role reversal. Rather than Odysseus setting out on a quest to return to the kingdom of Ithaca to Penelope, it is Penelope that is sent out to find Odysseus, in Ithaca's greatest time of need. The story here is far less complicated than Homer's original, obviously, but it's certainly functional. Visually, the Next Penelope is strictly 2D with a good amount of vibrant color and clean design on the whole. The ships are fairly simple, and some nice effects are animated into most set pieces. However, it really feels as if this game could have benefited from being developed into a 3D engine instead. Everything from the stages to the ships themselves look as if they were meant to be, but ended up just staying in a 2D prototype phase. With dynamic lighting and 60 frames per second animation on 3D models, the Next Penelope could really have shone. It's all still good, but maybe not as good as it could have easily been. The character design is pretty tops though. The futuristic interpretations of Penelope and other major players from the classic epic are great. That Penelope herself is damaged to the point of missing limbs and an eye from continuous sacrifice for her people is a neat touch. On the sound front, the Next Penelope features a great soundtrack that matches the intense action found throughout the game. The sound effects, on the other hand, aren't quite as solid. Most effects work well, but collisions sound like gunshots rather than vehicular impact, which bothered us a bit. The voice samples in the game are also mostly good, but there's one word that kind of grated on my ears.
Time extended.
Every time. Finally, the UI in the Next Penelope is nice and clean, with great use of color and bloom. An option also exists that allows the player to angle the screen for a more dynamic perspective, though because the game is entirely in 2D with quote-unquote baked-in perspective and shadowing on everything, it doesn't work especially well, in addition to adding triangular borders to the screen. But in the end, how does the Next Penelope stack up? Let's take a look. The squirrely controls in the Next Penelope take almost the entire game to get used to, and with the final racetracks having no safety barriers, this could cause issues. The Next Penelope has a fair amount of challenge to it that will keep intermediate players fairly satisfied through to the end. In terms of length, with 19 core stages to overcome, the Next Penelope has a good amount of playtime to chew through even without multiplayer or the unlockable bonus stages. The Next Penelope's visuals work well, but could really have benefited from a 3D engine rather than the faux 3D 2D engine it sports. Character design and UI is excellent. The music in the Next Penelope is fantastic, but a few effects, especially collisions, and the time extend voice clip kind of drive us insane. The Next Penelope is a good F-Zero style racing game at times and a decent shmup at others. It all comes together to form a pretty fresh experience overall. The Next Penelope is priced at about $13 US, which feels like a good price for what's here. The Next Penelope definitely has a heavy emphasis on racing, but enough of a shooting edge to be worth a good look from shmup fans. It has its share of issues, but overall it's a game that's both playable and well presented. The Next Penelope gets a 4 out of 5. You can get your copy of the Next Penelope for about $13 on the Nintendo eShop today. Well, that's another in the bag for the Shmuppy Holidays on Nintendo Switch. We're down to the final episode of the year, and this one has some high expectations, let me tell you. Tune in again when we tackle RXN Raijin on the next episode of Bullet Heaven. In 2018, we're looking to snag some of the rarest PC Engine shmups ever made, and we're a good way towards one of the most expensive ones at the time of this episode. If you'd like to support Bullet Heaven to get some of the rarer games for review, consider becoming a patron on Patreon or buying music from the Mudprints music page. Links, as always, are in the description below.